I want to go first to this in the Art of Certainty. Was it the Art of Certainty? The lecture? No, not the Art of Certainty. The Art of Thinking.
Yeah.
In the
I remember
last
the lecture though.
Yeah, there was a lecture on certainty, right?
Yes.
And he says, I think this was in a Q&A period. He says that, I paraphrased it here, but I've taken some quotes. So statistics isn't knowledge, probability isn't knowledge, but it's something you might turn into knowledge. It's a hypothesis, it's certainty that's knowledge. And he said that statistics is relations between unknowns. I don't quite get what he means relations between unknowns. For example, if I take a poll of the number of people who voted for a certain candidate in an election, like what exactly is the relationship between unknowns? Like I've got a number of people and I got a number of people who voted for X. What do you...
He means I guess I would say that he means inferential statistics like you do with science. I think he's not distinguishing between descriptive statistics, which just describes what you're saying, like say 40% are Democrats. That would be descriptive statistics, or like grab a random person, like how many of those would be Democrats? It's different than you're trying to infer that from, say, 20% of people seem to, I don't know, like vanilla ice cream. Can you then say that another group of 100 people, that 20 people will like vanilla ice cream? That would be inferring something. Trying to infer something from stats.
Okay. And then, so in what sense, so once you take what's descriptive and you try and make a statement about some future unknown, that's when it becomes inferential. And
yes.
What is the relation between unknowns? What is the unknowns? Like, where are the relationships? What does that even mean?
I think you could say it more precisely because he doesn't have that background, but with stats, I would say that you're trying to infer something that doesn't necessarily hold. It only holds most of the time. That you can't say in every case, or that with any certainty that this will hold true. That you can't say with, you're not saying that, like, you're not making statements about all, or that's necessarily follow. Like if you grab 100 people, will they all, will 20 of them necessarily like vanilla? Are you saying they'll, like, there's a 20% chance that they'll be like vanilla? Like it's depends how you phrase it.
Right. So, okay, let's say you're inferring some attribute of a new group on the basis of statistics. Then the unknown is, I still don't really, I get it, but I didn't quite.
Guess.
Yeah.
It's a best guess about the group based on something statistical, not based on something like an all. Same, you're not trying to infer based on like all men reason, or you can say all men are between 4 and 6 feet tall, or something like that. Like that reason that always holds, in any conclusion based on that would be like knowledge. Or if you only say, like, if you phrase it like with uncertainty, like, oh, I only think some portion of men are between 4 and 6 feet, or something with uncertainty in it, or it doesn't necessarily follow that from there that the next person you grab will be between 4 and 6 feet tall.
Right. Okay. And the relationship here is between the known group and the unknown group, and the unknown is the unknown group. Is that the idea? Like you don't actually know anything about the unknown group, and so it's some relationship between attributes of a known group and an unknown group, but you don't know what the causal relations are or anything like that, and that's why he says relations between unknowns.
Yeah, I think that's what he's trying to say, because in stats you find some sample, say 100 people, see what that distributes out as, like how many like vanilla ice cream, for example. Then you try to make a claim about what all people do, or some larger group does. Okay. So if you do a sample of 100 people and 20 like vanilla, what would be true if you grab another 100 random people.
Right.
How many would like vanilla?
like? Yeah, okay.
And that would be inferential stats, which is like, you don't know the causal reasons why somebody likes vanilla. You're just using the stats to make the inference,
Right.
which you can make decent inferences, but they
Yeah.
don't hold with certainty.
Yeah.
Not in the same way, there's still unknowns in there.
What do you like vanilla?
Not much.
I guess because I think you've used the ice cream example quite a bit in
Yeah, it's
induction.
easy though.
Yeah.
It's the easiest example, yes. But I don't like vanilla. I'm more for a coffee ice cream.
Yeah, me neither. I don't like vanilla. Okay, cool. So then why is it that inferences like that hold when you look at certain, like, for example, if you look at it, the statistics of people who vote Democrat in a given geographical area, why is it that you can suddenly say, oh, that portion will approximately hold in some other, like, how do you know, how does that work? It's just that it just by chance some part of a causal relationship is being captured, or what?
Probably.
Okay.
I mean, you're only capturing partial stuff when you do that. That it doesn't hold, or is never a good way to discover new knowledge, because you're only doing like your best bet in those
Right.
situations.
Right.
And you can't say that's knowledge when you don't know about the causal factors. You're just saying it's a thing that happens.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's just, it's a thing that happens, and
Right.
you're doing the best you can, but it's not like the sort of claims where you figure out that what makes the moon cause the tides. I mean, that's something different. It's not statistical.
All right.
You
Got it.
find what necessarily causes the moon to cause the tides.
So it's sort of like an induction by enumeration, and just because you've got no
Yes.
other alternative, right? You're just like, oh,
Yeah.
this happened X amount of times, so I don't have any other information. I'm going to go with this. So in the same way.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
You can make some decent conclusions, but not as absolute as it would be like when you're doing something like what makes the tides happen.
Right.
And what necessarily makes it happen.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess the application of this that I was thinking about was like, you can make assumptions about people based off your own personal experiences. And that's a kind of statistical inference, right? Because you're raised in a certain environment and you deal with certain kinds of people. So, if you're raised in 17th century Britain, or in ancient Greece, or in, 600 AD or whatever, in Charlemagne's kingdom, like, you're going to have different statistical inferences you're going to make about people. And then, so where, I guess the question is, like, being able, how do you distinguish between what is the statistical inference you make about people versus what is the proper way to act, given that you might not actually know? Let's say you live in a society where most people are murderers, it doesn't suddenly make sense to go, oh, okay, well, the next individual could be completely fine. Like, I have to treat him as completely fine. Like, you just kind of, I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but it's easy I'm just trying to get at the fact that it's very easy when you have your own experiences to make statistical inferences on that basis about people, but then you've got to be able to make some distinction that's helpful between what is statistical and what is actual knowledge, and then how you conduct yourself.
Yeah. I mean, part of that is just the nature of the debate, right? The debate is that since the ancient Greeks, that they argue over how could you ever make a claim that all men are rational or something, or all men are rational animals, or all animals are alive, or anything like that. Is it ever possible to make that claim? And that kind of is the question here. Like, can we ever go from statistical likelihoods to certainties?
Right.
And I mean, that partly is the problem, but you could distinguish when you attain that knowledge, which is contextual certainty, I would say. That's how you know when something basically when you know it's holds necessarily. When it necessarily is the case, or you know the cause of something, you can say you moved from stats to knowledge.
Another relevant point. So Nietzsche kind of views other men as low and commoners who don't think, or whatever it is. I don't know. He views them negatively,
Yeah.
basically. But that's also
Generally.
a statistical inference, right? Like it shuts you off to
And I think
potentially.
he would recognize that. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, he's a little bit Heraclitean in the way he sees causality. A little bit. I mean, not as much as Heraclitus, but he doesn't believe in knowledge in that same way that we have the absolute certainty. He doesn't think that there is such a thing. And he probably would be more in line with like, all we do is our best explanation, or that's what we tell ourselves to our best knowledge, or whatever way we want to
Right.
will ourselves to see the world
Right.
or view the world.
Right. Okay. So the downside, though, is that you can end up quite malevolent very easily, because if you're
I
just
think
going
so.
off statistical info, like Nietzsche's attitude to women, for example, like you can easily have
Yeah.
bad experiences, let's say, or bad experiences with people,
Yeah.
but then if you're relying on that, you end up in this kind of, I don't know, it doesn't seem like a good place to be.
Not really, but that's, yeah, I mean, I would say that is one of the errors of Nietzsche, that he's much more unsure about causality.
Right. Okay. Let's go to some aphorisms. Let's take some bites.
I don't get the first one.
Yeah,
I
me
read
neither.
that several times.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't get that. This was interesting. A warlike man sets upon himself. Like
Yeah.
he's always finding something to war with or against. Although it's kind of bare bones. And I mean, yeah, maybe like what, I don't know.
Some of this is rhetorical technique, where you mention something like peaceful, then you mention the opposite, which is war. So imagine peace with a warlike man. I mean, that's just a rhetorical device, I think, to get you to think. So I'm not sure if it's actually very effective.
Yeah.
But that's what's going on here. He's putting contraries against each other.
Right.
That gives a vivid image.
Yeah.
Which I'm not sure what he's saying, but it's weird to think of a man at war upon himself in a peaceful world, which almost like describes many modern people. They're at war with themselves, despite the peaceful world around them.
Can you expand on that? That's interesting. What makes you think that?
Like conflicts about your purpose in life, conflicts about just, can you be happy? Can you attain your career? Those problems that aren't just about merely surviving, but the deeper things about meaning and purpose in life.
So, okay, you're pointing out, like, I agree. There's definitely this.
Yeah.
There's often this angst and anxiety about life, and yet when you look around, putting aside lockdowns, when you look around, like, but even lockdowns, right? Like compare lockdown conditions of lockdowns to living in, I don't know, 800, 700 AD or something. I still imagine it's better.
Yeah.
And yet there's so many people who are like baffled, confused, unsure.
Oh, I have another way to look at it too.
Yes.
A warlike man would be, say, a soldier back from war.
Yeah.
And then when they're home, the war is over. What do they do to themselves? It's almost like PTSD in a way, like he's describing, like there's an internal conflict that happens when the warlike man is in peace. It's like almost like harming his nature. It's like a Greek play, actually. Ajax is about one of the Greeks who killed many Trojans, but when he got home, he was depressed and he went on a rampage and killed some Athenians. So it was like a tragedy, but that's what happens when a warrior goes home.
That's very interesting. It's interesting because when was that even written? And it reflects a reality that's true now.
Yes. Yeah. That's, yeah, I think even Aristotle knew about it. I mean, that was before Aristotle.
Right. Okay. Very interesting. Or what about, actually, you know what? What about that? I was just thinking now that in Brandon, we covered, he was talking about this anxiety you feel when you're happy because you don't think you deserve happiness. So you take actions because you want a sense of control over reality. There's this unknown. There's like, oh, I'm feeling happy. This isn't supposed to happen. There's this desire to control reality and not have it present you with all these unknowns like happiness. You then set out to destroy that happiness in some way, just to alleviate the anxiety you feel of this uncertainty. So maybe there's a tie in there as well. This is like the man at war with himself, who's suddenly put in peaceful conditions will find a way to bring war back.
Yes, I think that's the way to look at it. That the warrior, the person who has killed other men before, will bring himself upon himself. That he will attack himself even if you have no one else to attack. He will attack himself.
Well, the warlike man could even be a man who wars with himself anyway. So even if he's put in peaceful conditions, he starts finding a way to war with himself. Okay.
That's true. That's true.
I wanted to get your thoughts on this. I was reading Mathematics for the Non-Mathematician, and the author says that there are a few different methods of acquiring knowledge. So maybe I'll let you read it and then I'll just get your thoughts on it. Oh, this is my whole question, really, actually. Yeah, I was just curious about his distinction, specifically about modes of reasoning, because they seem to overlap, really, like specifically experience and experimentation and reasoning by analogy. Like, oh, there was he put induction in there. It was this. Induction was like a completely separate one. So it's like, how isn't induction the same? There's something, analogy might be a form of induction, and so might experience and experimentation. I just wondered if his analysis was good. It just seems like,
well, to clarify by induction, when I talk about that term, I mean just new and surprising knowledge. Like it's something new that was prior to then completely unknown. I mean, so I think, well, experience and experimentation brings you to new knowledge. Reasoning by analogy is just, well, things that don't necessarily connect to each other. Just using some thought or imagination you had. I mean, it doesn't have to be anything real. You could completely imagine it. Any kind of analogy. It's almost like using examples.
He gave the example of if someone else goes to university and does well in a class, then you reason, oh, I could do the same. That's reasoning by analogy. But isn't that induction? You're like going, okay, other man can study, other man similar to me, I can study too, something like that. I
would argue with him. The analogy would be like, say, talking about what a doctor does as a description of, and using that to compare with what a architect does, and that they both have a set of rules and techniques to do it. Or you could say, you can liken building a house or fixing a house to, like, you can liken a carpenter to a metal worker, but they're not really the same. Or maybe more like an analogy is like, compare an astronaut to, or compare a boat to a rocket ship. I mean, they're significantly different.
You can analogize for the purpose of like illuminating something you're
Right.
trying to explain in abstract terms.
Yes.
But you could also analogize for the purpose of drawing some inference, right? Like, okay, well, let's see. Building a house needs a solid foundation. Therefore, life needs a solid foundation. Like if you literally got there, you could say that to you could say that to illuminate some concept from philosophy, but to actually reason on that basis and draw the conclusion that would be an induction, right? So you could
I would call that
analogize.
just inference. Well, would that be an induction? I mean, why we call that induction?
I thought
just-
any generalization is induction. Maybe it's my definitions here, but
Induction. I've had trouble defining it lately myself
yeah,
when
okay.
I thought about it more. I mean, I'd rather just talk about like generalizing to, like, you could say, is that abstraction? Yes, it would be. I think any kind of inference is an abstraction or abstract thinking. It is an inference. The question would be, are you using what premises are you using? Where do the premises come from?
Okay.
That's really the question here. By analogy, it's usually from something, from just two concepts that seem unrelated and finding a similarity. The premises of experience and experimentation. That's the observation. That's where the premises come from. Deduction, those claims usually could be any kind. And they're already existing and they necessarily hold. Because they're like syllogisms like that. They always hold every time. So deductions like that, those are the type of premises it uses. That you can't use like maybe or possibly in those reasoning processes. And revelation, of course, is another way just to get your premises. And
Maybe
induction could be reaching conclusions that in ways that nobody has done before,
right.
or very new ways.
These could also be like very fine distinctions that only come up later when man develops his knowledge. Like, so for example, just as, you could reason and say, well, Columbus didn't discover America, the natives did, or the Vikings did, but the word has a different meaning in those contexts. Like, and so similarly, when the Babylonians and the Egyptians discovered pi, like it's not the same, like you might not call it induction because the process they used to reach it was different from the ones the Greeks used to reach it, for example. So, okay, these are probably small, very fine distinctions.
Yeah, Aristotle mentions those generally too, like analogy, deduction, and observation.
Right.
Like he generally
okay.
distinguishes those things too.
He does. All right.
So that comes from Greek tradition. Like by analogy is something used. And Aristotle used induction in a specific way, usually just going from particular to universal.
Right.
So going from the particular to the more abstract.
Right.
Which I guess you could call a generalization, but it can be deductive in his system. Anyway, the point is it depends where your premises come from.
Yeah, okay. That's a hard one. You probably need a lot of different experience with different reasoning process. I don't have enough to make sense that much of those distinctions, but
yeah.
Okay, let's next aphorism. I mean, there's two different things here for me, and I don't see the connection between them, which is you bully your habits with your principles, or justify, honor, scold, or conceal them. And then the connection between that and two men with the same principles probably aim at them at something basically different.
Well, to start with, you saying that principles kind of mistreat what you are by nature, that your morality or moral code forces you into something lesser than is worth your life, or not like phrased that way, but that morality is making your life more difficult or hinders your life or forces you into some intrinsic belief to demean yourself in a way, like bullying you to believe in a way. Imagine like some Christian coming by and telling you, you must do what God says. You must follow his moral code or else I'll punish you. Looking at it like that. You
Right.
bully the person to behave against their will or habits.
I
Too
see.
many
Okay,
ways.
so the person is like caged by abstractions. That's how he sees it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then what's with the connection to two men with the same principles? Probably
Okay, so let's do the same moral code. Say
Yeah.
they're both Christians.
Yeah.
They both aim at their habits with them. Or they both use their principles to aim at something different.
Right.
I guess he's just saying that people bully themselves in many different ways. It seems like that's what he means.
Right. Okay. We may have covered this. I can't remember the one. Whoever despises himself still respects himself as one who despises. Did we do this one?
Maybe.
Maybe. That's interesting. Like, but then what would be, how could you get lower than, what would be lower than this? Like, how could you not respect yourself as one who despises? Could you despise yourself and not respect yourself as one who despises? Or I mean, like, yeah, what basically it seems like rock bottom is, there's still respect at rock bottom is what I take from this, but that doesn't, is there worse than rock bottom where there's no respect for yourself?
I'm thinking if you could, can you really go lower than that? Can you ever really have somebody who does despise himself and still doesn't even respect his despise? I don't know if you can. It's like the nature of hating yourself in a way has to respect that you hate it because you see it's bad,
right?
And you hate what's bad, and it's good to hate what's bad. So it's good to hate yourself, but that doesn't make sense. It's an inherent contradiction in a way that a person like this is living in a contradiction. I guess we could say that you can't both, you in effect are living both at once. You're hating yourself as somebody bad, but you're loving yourself as someone who hates the bad. So it's a weird state of being.
Actually, what about someone who despises himself but hides the fact that he despises himself from himself? Wouldn't that be lower? Like Jim
Perhaps.
Taggart.
I think so.
Okay.
That's an interesting case. Yeah, I think that would be lower. They don't even see that they hate themselves.
Right.
It's one thing to know you hate yourself.
Right.
Another thing to tell yourself you don't hate yourself when you know you do. Like, how could you live like that? I don't even know. Simultaneously, to not even see it. That's insane to me.
Well, I don't know if it's ever the case that, like if you're evading knowledge, it's not like you are complete, like there's no data at all that presents itself to you that shows you that, but it's you somehow find a way to constantly turn away from that in a bad state. Like, I guess that was the point of Jim Taggart in Atlas Shrugged, right?
Yes.
Like him constantly.
That a man can do that.
Yeah.
That a person can do that by willfully turning off their mind. They can't do that.
Right.
And not even the lowest people seem to do that. Only the lowest of the low really do that.
Yeah. It's hard to sometimes see that in reality because dishonesty is never, well, it can't be consistent. So it's always like some small portion of a person.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I think part of that's the power of literature to have you expand your cognition even to things that you might not see often, or you can only speculate about. But it gives you some abstract power to think about these cases. I think that's part of the value of Rand, that gives you these artistic examples that really illustrate the thoughts and the idea in a way that's vivid and immediate and plausible, even if you take your mind to that extent. And it's almost what Nietzsche does in a way that he tries to present things in a aesthetic, artistic way.
Would you say that when Socrates speaks to people in the marketplace and they get annoyed and uncomfortable by him, is that a dishonesty? And then they avoid speaking to him. Is that an example of dishonesty? Because you can find examples of that all the time. Like if you ask someone a certain question because you're genuinely, I remember, I think I told you this after I read Euthyphro and I went to some discussion. Some guy says he likes adaptability, and I asked him what it was, and he says, yeah, it's common sense, and he didn't want to talk about it anymore. And it's like, is that, and that's like from Socrates, you know, that's a page from Socrates, right? That's what he does. He walks around asking people like, well, tell me, what is this thing here? And then they start giving him some unthought out answer, and then they get it frustrated and they just leave him. So obviously there is the question of, you know, a person could genuinely say, well, is this discussion one I want to pursue? Is this productive for me or not? That could be an honest, you know, attitude you could have. But then it seems weird that someone would get frustrated. That would be a sign of, maybe that would be a sign of dishonesty, right? That kind of thing you see in Socrates' dialogues.
Yeah, I think that's what Plato's trying to portray. I mean,
Right.
it's a literary Socrates. It's
Yeah.
not actual events. There is literary effect going on.
Yeah.
But in a way, that is what's happening.
Right.
That other people engage with Socrates, they do get emotional. And it really does get into why they say what they do, especially in the one about rhetoric, to
Right.
Gorgias.
Yeah.
It gets into a lot about getting emotional when he asks questions in a certain way, or Socrates is even pretty ironic at times and insults people. He literally makes them mad on purpose.
Right.
And it's things like that that we see there, that people are reacting in some way, something deeper than just the fact. They might be reacting to their worldview, which often they are. And I do think it's almost like sometimes it's dishonesty because the truth hurts them too much. It's not just that he's acting in a way that is socially inappropriate, but it's something deeper than that. It's not just that he's breaking the rules of socialization.
Right.
Yeah, sometimes
okay.
it is dishonesty.
Yeah. Do you know that when he was put on trial in Greece, the tradition was that both the prosecutor and the defendant proposed a punishment?
I didn't know that.
And then guess what? So the prosecutor proposed Socrates be put to death by hemlock. Guess what Socrates proposed as his punishment?
Well, I don't know what he proposed.
He said that the state should keep him in luxury for the rest of his days on the state's account for the service he's rendered them.
It's a good answer.
No one voted for that. But I love the arrogance in it. It's like there's this conviction in what he's doing, that he's willing to get up in front of a whole group, a whole courthouse, and say, you know, this is what my punishment. It's like a complete inversion of the whole process.
I know.
It's great. Okay. You may not know this is a mathematical question, but I was just thinking about this. So there's axioms of number, and like, for example, any two numbers, A and B, A plus B equals B plus A. So the order you add those numbers in is irrelevant. You still get the same product. And that's based off observation. For example, you know, if I take 10 cows and I take another 10 sheep and I add them together, I get 20. If I take 10 sheep, take another 10 cows, I still get 20. And like, you just abstract away from that to, you know, with numbers, and you go, okay, so that always holds. But here, like in this, you know, reading this book, he constantly goes on about mathematics only thinks something is solid when it can be deductively proved. But these axioms are not deductive in mathematics. And so aren't they, you know, if that's what they say, that only deductions are consistent. They say something like induction is probabilistic. It's not certain. It's not, you know, you don't know if it's true. It holds most of the time. And deduction is the only knowledge you can only reach certain knowledge through deduction. So if that's true and that's what they believe, then I'm curious, like, what do they think about axioms then? Because the whole basis of their axioms is in kind of observational inference, inductive inference, whatever you want to call it. The whole basic.
Is this person claiming that the axioms are reached that way?
No, he didn't comment on it, but I was curious about it because, like, wouldn't that be a problem for these people who think that all induction is probabilistic and the only form of proof is deduction. Because if all their laws, which they then go on to deduce everything from, are built on the basis of inductive inference, but then everything else is deductive and they refuse any other form of proof. And so like, I wonder what they think about that. Like, I'm going to ask this elsewhere, but I don't know if you've got thoughts on that, because it's like, it's weird to say you can base your whole mathematics on something you're not sure about, and then the rest has to be deductive.
Yeah, I think generally it isn't thought that that axiom is arrived at inductively, that it isn't arrived at through observation the way you said. I think you could support your claim, but that's not the traditional thought. As you thought of as deductive, because you're beginning with a particular premise arrived at through, say, just reasoning, is how they would phrase it, I think. And that with the premises we have, we can just reason through syllogisms. That
Not
we have
for this though. Not this is the axiom. It's like an assumption. They even call it an assumption from what I've read. Meaning,
Yeah,
like,
you're right.
you can't show,
You're right.
there's no way to deductively show A plus B
Okay.
equals B plus A unless you
Oh, I see
do
your
that.
question better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just the first axiom,
Let's
the same
see.
for all the others.
The axioms of math. Yeah, I don't really know the process by which they determine these axioms. I mean, I do know these axioms you're talking about. I don't know where they come from. I forget how they
Observation.
get there.
From what I've read, it's observation. Like, you just observe that when you take two different quantities of different things, the order in which you add them is not relevant to the end product of what the quantity. And so you just go, okay, on that basis of observation and physical phenomena, you then make a law that reflects that what's I guess I'm using objectivist terminology, what's self-evident in the thing. And you kind of go, well, you assume that if you add 10 sheep and 10 cows, it'll be 20 in the same way if you add 10 cows and 10 sheep. And then you just assume it's the same for every other instance of things you add. And that's what I got, is that it's based on observation. But
yeah, I think you're right that it is, but I think mathematicians don't like to see it or believe it that way. That they are usually like Platonic, in the sense that their concept of these things are numbers, that the rules they come up with, they're just coming up with systems of rules that reflect numbers that they see. And those rules can be constructed in a way that they necessarily hold. Then we could discover what those things are.
Right.
And they might say, oh, that reflects reality, or numbers are something that reflects something deeper, like the Pythagoreans would suggest. But we're thinking more modern terms. They're not as mystical, obviously, but they're saying there's something about reality that they're discovering through these Platonic numbers, or whatever you want to call them. So
yeah, go on, sorry.
That's why it's deductive, because it's like Platonic. I forget the term, but it is a term common enough in math that anybody would know what you're talking about when you say like Platonic numbers or whatever, because it's just the way of thinking about math.
Yeah.
Like, there's no real triangle in reality. There's no true triangle, because every triangle is at least a little slightly off from the perfect triangle.
Right.
So it's like believing the perfect triangle. So you got the perfect number, and you just make deductions based on these perfect rule systems.
Do you know what's funny is I read this book, and I listened to the history of philosophy lecture, and Peikoff was talking about this kind of, these people who give off, he called it, he said a Pythagorean odor, which is, it's the kind that think that anything that doesn't have numbers is vague and uncertain and not real science. And he said, it's the kind of person who thinks if you say man needs self-esteem, they'll tell you, oh, that's too vague. They want, like, man needs 1.5 units of self-esteem, and every act he does gives him 1 unit, take minus 0.5 units. And this, and then I'm reading this book on maths, and the guy's saying, mathematics adds rigor to all these vague, uncertain sciences, these infant sciences of psychology. And it's like ripped straight out of this lecture. Like, what he's saying is the exact same thing. And it's super interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Aphorism number 79.
Number 79. Traces. Our soul that knows it. I don't really know if I get it. What was that bottom comes up? What they see as base about themselves comes to
Okay.
the surface.
I'm
I
gonna
don't think it's any deeper than that.
make some guesses. If you love someone and you show them that love, the way they react is in a sense a revelation of their psychology. Like if they don't love themselves, then it'll show if they don't love themselves by how they treat you, something like that maybe. And because
Yeah.
you need a certain experiences for the sediment of your soul to come up, right? Like, you know, you can go day by day and you don't feel that much, let's say, but then something happens, you speak to someone or you learn something new, and suddenly it causes you to react emotionally in some way because it triggers something deeper inside of you that wasn't there.
I think that's a good interpretation. Yeah, this sentiment comes up.
Just like you know how Kafka said literature is like a frozen axe to the is like an axe to the frozen river that is my soul, something like that, right? So same, I think same.
Yeah,
I don't
same
know.
idea.
That's my guess.
Same idea, probably. In same tradition of thinking, I'd say.
In what sense?
Or like existentialist kind of.
Okay. Maybe let's go to economics.
Yes.
Okay, we discussed that one. All right, maybe we'll try this. I don't know, we'll just try it. It might not be enough context, but
yeah.
And so it was about the broken window. Like if you smash and destroy things, it creates more demand. And so that's good for the economy. Like, you know, Punk throws a rock through a window. Well, now the owner of the store will need to go out and buy something new. He's going to stimulate the economy. That's what it's getting at.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's kind of comparing it to like, oh, war stimulated the economy.
Right.
War made the economy better.
Yes.
But did it really? I mean, things are destroyed and you're replacing it. Is that really an increase? It's kind of getting into the question of like, what is happening to the economy as a whole?
Yeah.
I mean, is it just that you're replacing the window? Is there something else about what's going on when you put resources into that? Does that take away from other areas? Like, what does it do to the whole economy?
Yeah.
And to think of it as a system, not just the one instance. So window broke, window replaced, money made. It's deeper than that.
Right. There's the unseen, as he says, which is part of the
Yes.
art of economics. But
Yes.
okay, like later on, he says, it seems like there's an increase in total demand as it was partly in terms of dollars of lower purchasing power. So I'm assuming he's referring to statistics from the war showing that there was more dollars purchased, or I don't know, something like that. But
I
how do
think
you
it just
even
means,
yeah.
I think it means inflation.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
talking about inflation.
But I don't know how do you, well, that's all well and good, but like, how do you know that? It just seems like it's maybe I need to understand the inflation chapter before this makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, like how he'd need to show more than just say, well, it seems like there's an increase in dollar demand, but in terms of lower purchasing power, that's not true. Like it doesn't I don't see how that follows from what he said before.
Well, I think he's just saying it doesn't necessarily follow. It's a fallacy to say it simply that therefore total demand increase in a better way. I mean, there's more to consider,
Right.
is what he's saying. I think that
Okay.
we need to finish looking at the whole picture. That we also need to look at inflation or monetary policy.
Got it.
Or how that affects the purchasing power of the dollar. Because inflation goes up as a result of all those broken windows. you're actually making less money, or money's going down. Each window you make is worth less and less until they're like not worth anything. Until all the windows you replace is like you're not increasing anything.
All right, I see. I like that actually. So the takeaway here is not the specific claim, rather it like that is in the, it seems it's that there's always less of a total demand, but the point here is actually there's way more to consider. That I think that's the, and then later on.
Yeah, and it would be a fallacy just say, oh, we broke something and that's all we need. We replaced it, therefore that's all I need to say to make this conclusion.
Right.
It's like, well, it could happen, but what else is happening? If nothing else happens, maybe, I mean, you could look at other things that could really do increase the demand and then increase the wealth. But
yeah, okay.
it's hard to say.
No, I like that. So rather than go too deep into this, it's just the point is there are other considerations that you need to take into account before making the claim that destroying something increases overall demand.
Yeah.
I think we'll finish up with more aphorisms. 80.
Yeah, I like this one.
I'm still working out what he's talking about.
Well, just remember, knowing in this case is usually the Kantian sense of it. Being objective in the Kantian sense.
Okay.
So when somebody says know thyself, if they're Kantian, what do you think they would be suggesting implicitly?
Know thyself would mean something like, I don't know, find some kind of ultimate form that explains everything and then don't worry about
Something like
anything
that.
else.
Or to know is to be unconcerned with yourself. To know anything objectively would mean, oh, you can't concern yourself with yourself at all, because only then you could be objective in the
Okay.
Kantian sense. Completely
Okay.
be detached from yourself.
Ah,
So if somebody
okay.
tells you, if a Kantian tells you know yourself, how do you know yourself? In a way, it's almost like a contradiction. Or you're saying don't concern yourself anymore. And
All
then
right.
he's accusing Socrates of that. The scientific man, he thinks of like, say the mathematician you're talking about. Like only numbers make things intelligible. I mean, that would be the scientific man Nietzsche's talking about.
Right.
Or the
And
people
then-
that just do research their whole life and don't do much except live in academia and that's it.
And then what was Socrates in here? Like cease to concern yourself, become objective. Okay, I get that. That's the disconnect between reality and this abstraction that
He
you have
was,
to not know yourself. But then Socrates, why did he drop Socrates
well,
in there?
he's Platonic. Socrates is still pretty Platonic. And
Okay.
Socrates is basically Plato.
But wasn't the
There's, like,
point
no
of Socrates to question your knowledge rather than like, it seems, I don't, you know, there's a,
Plato is Socrates, really. I mean, there is no
Yeah.
distinction as far as the literature.
okay. So
That's
why
what I
would he
mean.
attack Socrates is what I don't get. Because if you just go by, let's say with the context that I have, like if you just go by a few dialogues or like a dialogue where he's asking people about what is justice, like isn't that, I don't see how that's like a complete
Well, he
disconnect.
is too skeptical, sometimes in a way that he doubts any power to do anything. Even maybe in the sense that Socrates said he was doing what he does because the oracle told him to. That in a way,
Okay.
he's detaching his own interests from what he does. He's not doing it for his good or himself or even any relation to what he thinks, but knowledge in itself, apart from himself. That is still how Socrates thought. It is great to ask questions, but his intent was pretty like above himself. It wasn't for his good or the good of people or something, but the good of philosophy in that abstract kind of way. Disinterested in just the truth for its own sake, regardless of any interestedness or purpose for anybody. So it's a
So,
bit detached is what he's saying, I think.
so this is this idea of once you become clear on something and you know it, you're no longer concerned with it. You're just kind of deductively applying this thing. Is that what he's getting at?
Yeah, or it doesn't attach to any interests of yourself or others, even just
Right.
is pure, and it's just a pure knowledge that's
Right.
in itself, not
Right.
for any reason.
Right.
And Nietzsche like hates it more than anything. If it's whatever it is, it should be interested in some way. I mean, Nietzsche says like, as long as it's for something, that's fine. But for no one at all, that's absolutely horrible. Or it's base, or it's weak.
Oh, we've done this 81, salting, quenching your thirst with salt water.
Yeah.
Oh, did we? Actually, we did something
was
about
similar.
the guy focusing on the composition of the seawater.
Yeah.
Let's finish on this one.
It's doing it.
This sort of relates to truth and lies, right? Like spinning, you just got to try to spin stories about things or metaphors.
Yeah, but I think it's even more of a insult on who's he insulting? We just making fun of people that you'd rather salt the truth or salt their what is the case and just dress it up and absolutely destroy it. It'd be horrible. Yeah.
What,
Just make it bitter and terrible tasting.
but what's the alternative if you think that's the truth to him? If the truth is salty seawater, which you're going to choke and gulp on, what's the, if you see it, what would he say to that? Like, make something else up?
No, he's saying the truth. You're adding salt to the truth. The truth is fine. You can drink it. So why would you salt it? So you can't even drink it anymore.
But then
It's like a Christian adding their guilt trips and all that. Why would you add that to the truth if that only makes it so you can't quench your thirst even? So even if you're inventing something, why would you invent a truth that you salt and make inedible and would die if you ate it? Like, why would you do that? Like, if you're going to make something up, it should serve you in some way. It should serve something rather than literally kill you. Or it's at least that's the alternative.
that's pretty interesting. Okay, so what if you reach the truth and the truth is unpleasant? Like, what would your alternative be? Like, it's not like you can, what would it mean to salt the truth as opposed to not salt it when it's unpleasant? If you like it, I can see people reaching, certain.
I don't think the metaphor would work anymore.
Yeah, okay.
Because the metaphor is really focusing on salt water. Like, you make it salt water. What? Salt water doesn't quench your thirst, but you drink it to quench your thirst. So it's like you salt it, you drink it, but why would you drink it if the point was to quench your thirst? Or why would you make it salty if you wanted to quench your thirst in the first place?
Right.
Why would you create a philosophy that destroys your life or that destroys a passion for life if you want to live life in the first place? If you want to live life, you're going to make up the truth, which Nietzsche does think what we do, that we decide the truth, not so much we discover it. But if you're going to decide it yourself, it should be something at least powerful or furthers or makes your life better or gives you power or gives you will, whatever it might be, whatever strength it gives you.